Hello there. What is going on, everyone? Is it time for another space game for Star Wars? Are we overdue? I am going to bring to you a pitch for a game that I think I'd like to see. I want to see if you agree with me. Let me know some of the points that I talk about in this game, and I want to hear if you guys agree with me, because I do think we're overdue for another space game. Star Wars is an IP that does certainly involve wars among the stars, and we kind of only have ground games right now, so we really need a space game. And I think it's definitely time for it to come. Now, I'm going to outline a couple of points about the game that I'd like to see. Now, there's definitely a lot of versions of games that I'd like to see, but I'm going to talk about a game that's sort of in between X-Wing and Armada, and for a number of reasons. But as far as scale, I'm talking about something that would be in between X-Wing Armada, that would capture a little bit of the feeling of both, but also be its own game. And that's what I want to talk about in today's video. If you guys are new here to the channel, I talk a lot about tabletop games, science fiction, franchise games, Star Wars games, Star Trek, all kinds of that stuff like that. Board games, card games, miniature games, war games, everything in between. Love to have you stick around. We're doing a $25 Amazon gift card giveaway right now. You just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my other videos to enter to win. All right, so with the success of Star Wars Squadrons as being a popularized game that showed a format that was sort of in between X-Wing and Armada as far as the game systems that we know, where X-Wing being a dogfight, a small dogfight of, like 3 or 4 ships versus 3 or 4 ships, little starfighters, with, an epic mode that could have maybe one Corellian Corvette, on your side or something like that, versus Star Wars Armada, that's all, capital starships and larger fleet engagements. Star Wars Squadrons gave us a new sort of focal point on space combat, and that was sort of an in-between. And this is sort of the aesthetic that I'd like to see a tabletop game capture. I think something like this could still work on a 3x3 playmat. I also think something like this would not necessarily have to have pre-painted miniatures. Although, bonus if they can swing it. And I think if they can swing it, they should probably go with a cheaper factory, something kind of like how NECA and WizKids does their stuff, because they're able to get kind of like a softer plastic. It doesn't have to be so hard and rigid, but like maybe a softer plastic that can be pre-painted easily and at much lower cost, keeping the end user cost down and then the price to entry much more affordable. Now, despite that, I'm fine if it ends up being, non-pre-painted, but at least pre-colored plastic. I think a lot will go for a game like this if it's pre-colored plastic, and it probably will allow an easier, less of a barrier to entry if it's not on a sprue. Also, if you can get single mold pieces, I think that's going to do wonders. And there's a lot of companies that can do this, even under Asmodee, which currently has the Star Wars license. If you look at Battle of Hoth, which came out, you've got again, all of your pieces, they were pre-colored, but not necessarily pre-painted. Worked perfectly. Look at Twilight Imperium. Everything is already ready to go in bags, right? It's pre-colored, but not pre-painted. And I think that totally works. As a matter of fact, they used to do that quite a bit with bases for Star Wars Legion. They used to do that with the squadrons for Star Wars Armada. So, they can do pre-colored plastic. It absolutely works. And then you have the option to paint if you want to. And that's kind of where the size comes in, because I am thinking that we still want to focus on starfighters. I think starfighters are still, should be the main piece, with capital ships being similar. And maybe 55-45 as far as importance. It should be a little bit more on starfighters, a little bit less on capital ships, but they should still be present. The idea is that you'd have starfighters a little bit larger than squadrons from Star Wars Armada, a little bit smaller than X-Wings, for example, in Star Wars X-Wing, such that they could still be painted, but they don't have to be. You could sit them on a base that's a little bit smaller than an X-Wing base, maybe something around the size of a nickel or a quarter, something like that, and I have plenty more bits and pieces for it, but the idea is that you would involve them doing dogfights with each other, fighting as groups, and also doing attack runs on capital ships. Capital ships being a big part of it. I think a typical game would have like maybe 2 to 3 capital ships and a couple of squadrons, or maybe fewer, with the idea that theoretically your biggest piece would be an Imperial Star Destroyer, which would also mean that it would probably be on a little bit of a sliding scale. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having a little bit of a sliding scale, but if we bring the size of things down, then we can have a bigger Star Destroyer. So the idea is a Star Destroyer that would be bigger than a Star Destroyer in Star Wars Armada, probably comparable to the size of an Imperial Raider in X-Wing. That would be the centerpiece ship, and that would be about as big as the game would go. But there's plenty of other capital ships that are in the ballpark that fit the bill, with a Corellian Corvette or a GR-75 or an Imperial Raider being amongst the smallest. Think of them as being only maybe 3 or 4 inches long, whereas a Star Destroyer would be about maybe 18 inches long, something along those lines. That doesn't get it 100% accurate, but it's certainly pretty close. And I think that would give you the ability to move squadrons around, move your fighters, move your starfighters around, have them engage, a Star Destroyer potentially with a couple of TIE fighters and TIE interceptors and things like that on the other side, but also have small and medium-sized capital ships on both sides. Not every game has to have a Star Destroyer, right? You can also equivalently do a Mon Calamari, do like the Home One as like the big centerpiece ship for the Rebels. And then, of course, there are similar versions that you could do for the Clone Wars. And, of course, you'd have to bring the Clone Wars into it. You might even want to launch with the Clone Wars. But other parts about this is I think you would build units, not necessarily with upgrade cards. I think upgrade cards are something that's sort of going away. At least from my preference, I'm less about upgrade cards, and I'm less about designing your list based on the groupings of squadrons that group together. If we want to have a lot of ships per side, which I think is a good thing, I want to borrow a little bit also from Drop Fleet Commander in that I'm not just activating one X-Wing at a time. I would have flight groups of at least 4 at a time. So this way I would activate and move a group of 4 fighters as a single wing that would all activate at once. Now I can all of a sudden activate 4 ships for the price of 1, and boom. And how I build them is how I customize my fleet, how I customize my builds. Maybe this group is 4 X-Wings, which means they're, going to have torpedo damage, and they're going to be kind of well-rounded, lightly shielded, and a little bit of everything. Maybe I'm going to run like an Alphabet Squadron, which gives them a little bit of a lot of different stuff, but a master of none, right? And you can even borrow in a little bit of the real world aspects of you want similar groups together, because this way they can all move, and movement would be an important part of it. If you have a single B-Wing in the group, which theoretically might be the slowest, then the whole group would have to move at that slowest speed. So there'd be some advantages for sort of doing like-minded, like 4 A-Wings together would be very, very fast, although they might not have as much firepower as if you kind of, add other things in there. And so like that's part of how I'd like to see it activated. That's how I'd like to see things done. It'd also be visually appealing that you could put things in. Now, I did say you could have each squadron or each starfighter on like about maybe a nickel or a quarter size base. That part I could take it or leave it. Doesn't have to be. You could also do one base that like kind of like the Candelabra base that the Star Wars Armada has, where you're going to put your 4 little squadrons, or you put your 4 little fighters on this base, right? Well, Armada uses 3. My idea is 4. Alternatively, capital ships would be a whole activation on their own, and so a Corellian Corvette would be 1, and then another activation would be a group of 4 fighters, right? Something like that. You could do larger capital ships as well. Quasar absolutely works. Architans absolutely works. Nebulon absolutely works. Things like that. They totally fit. They're recognizable. They're iconic. We're overdue for them, right? We're overdue for a big, beautiful Nebulon. They're all, like there was ones that were made for X-Wing back in its heyday, but then there was cease and desist letters and, and all of that stuff. So like the Nebulons we have in Armada are pretty, but they're also very, very brittle. And you have this super tiny little thin plastic piece that connects to the super tiny thin plastic piece in the middle, and they all break. And like most of mine are broken. So I'd love to see a hefty, good size Nebulon model that's maybe like 5 5 inches long or something, like maybe 6 inches long, a good size. Not exactly Armada Starhawk size, but like close, in the ballpark there. And this way you have your Star Destroyer as like your bigger piece. I have some mock-ups. Now don't worry too much about these pictures. It's AI slop, but I wanted to get you an idea of like a 3x3 with a Star Destroyer being bigger than it is, and probably be even bigger than this. And kind of what something like this could look like. You could have a lot of stuff that you could activate, a lot of units. You're activating them in groups, so you're activating, like maybe 3 activations on one side. Maybe the Star Destroyer has to go last, right? The other thought I was thinking about was like, what if the Star Destroyers, since we're not using upgrade cards, how do we upgrade this? And my thought was that you'd have actually parts of deck plating that actually physically come out of the model that like pop off, and you can put turbo lasers on there, or you can take it off and just have it regular deck plating. You could also replace that with damage, like your damage counter. Like if they blow up that turbo laser, you actually pull it out and you put like a destroyed. Basically, you'd have 3 different piece options for every upgrade slot or every hard point on the Star Destroyer, and there'd be physical pieces that you could physically plop out in the same way that your Starfighter wing is physically, you see what you get. What you see is what you get. Well, that's 2 X-wings and 2 A-wings. Okay, so they have a mix of speed and firepower. Cool. Boom. Whereas if you look at the Star Destroyer and it's got a lot of empty deck plating, but it's got a couple of turbo lasers on its left side, well, now you know that it's going to fire out the left side. But as you destroy them, you pull off the turbo laser, and then you put on the damage part, and maybe it even has like a little bit of red, like it's got smoke coming out of it or something like that. I think that'd be a really cool way to do it. This way you could keep it visual, you could keep it beautiful, and keep it attractive to people who walk by and see, like, wow, this was really cool. That would also mean that your Star Destroyer model would have kind of like sunken recesses where different plastic inserts would go along the sides of it. And of course, the shield generators too. You'd have to show as shield generators get destroyed, and being able to do that with a plastic model would be a really cool thing. So I'd love to see stuff like that. You could do similar things with other other capital ships as well, but they probably wouldn't need to have as many individual pieces that come out and come off. Now, again, there's turrets on the CR90, there's turrets on an Imperial Raider, and so like you can definitely do that sort of, I'm going to pop this upgrade on, and like maybe a CR90 only has 2 modular pieces that come off and come back on. You can only upgrade them in 2 ways, but bigger ships have more and more hard points that are physically modular, and you actually put the pieces on there. This is also something that's kind of inspired by the way Snapship's Tactics does their upgrades and their design, and it's a very cool idea of what you see is actually what you get, and I think it'd be a really fun thing. Doesn't have to be pre-painted, but I'd like to see a game in that scale, and I'd love to know what you guys think. Do you think that we're overdue for another spaceship game? B, do you think it needs to be pre-painted, or is pre-colored simply good enough? Or would you rather just see them completely do one on a sprue and allow for a lot more detail and customizability? What are things that you look, or are you it must be pre-painted or bust? Like, let me know where you stand on that argument, and do you like any of the other ideas that I talked about in this video? Again, this isn't necessarily the end-all be-all of games, because I would still love to see a massively zoomed out game that lets you actually have like 15, 16 Star Destroyers and stuff like that in a normal size game. I'd love to see that too. And of course, this one could be double size 6x3 as well. There's definitely a lot of options there, but in the lack of current supported space games, I'd love to see something new, because also when a game is new, it's especially exciting and fun, and you're waiting to see. I think these types of games are most fun within the first year or 2 of their debut. That's when everything is fresh and the meta hasn't been established yet, and you're playing for the pure joy of the game, and not necessarily at the win at all costs type of meta that develops over time as games become competitive and more successful. So I think it's time for a new game. I'd love to see it. Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. That's going to do it for today's video. Be sure to check out our sponsors. We have awesome discount codes at BattleFoam. Use code Crabbok VIP to save 15% over at BattleFoam. You can also head over to Game Toppers. Use code Crabbok15 to save 15% off of mats and accessories at Game Toppers. Very cool stuff. Great partners for the channels. Links are down in the description below. I will talk to you later. May the force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes. So say we all. And always wash your socks.